Good morning, I'm harleysch from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for August 27th, 2024. There's so much going on in the world and things are moving so rapidly. I want to go through a couple of the leading developments to try and situate you within a historic context of a fundamental change going on in world strategic relations. What we're seeing is a clash between two paradigms, one which is coming to an end, the era of the unipolar order, and the emergence of a multinodal or multipolar order, which represents an end to the dollar empire, end to the dictation of policy coming from Washington and London, or a shift into a continuing drift into permanent war and possibly nuclear war. It's a very rough period. Everyone's on edge. We're on the verge of tremendous catastrophe. So let's take a look at some of the leading developments and see where it's taking us. Let's start with Ukraine. With the desperate NATO effort to try to change the subject or change the direction by sending Ukrainian troops on a kamikaze mission into the Kursk region of Russia. And it's clear that this was a NATO operation. It was planned by NATO. It's armed and equipped by NATO. And there may very well be a significant number of NATO forces involved in the operation. Now, what Scott Ritter pointed out yesterday is that this is not going to change the direction of the war. Ukraine cannot win. And what we're seeing is a Russian reorganization, which includes cutting off the Ukrainian troops, leaving them trapped, possibly without a way out, and at the same time an escalation of the bombardment by Russia of Ukrainian military sites, logistics, and so on. It's clear that the Ukrainian troops that were moved into Kursk are overextended. It does reflect something like the last minutes of the Hitler regime with the Battle of the Bulge, the attempt to try and break up the unified drive of the Allied forces in December 1944, which ended up ultimately with the final defeat of the Nazis in Germany. Now, the other aspect of the desperation is the turn toward possible nuclear terrorism, the use of drone attacks and other kinds of attacks on nuclear power plants at Zaporizhia and also in Kursk. Now, interesting question here. Where are the Greens that are always so worried about nuclear accidents? Well, the German Greens in the government are still totally committed to the war. It just exposes them as hypocrites. They never gave a damn about the danger of radiation and runaway nuclear exposure, which is short of use of nuclear weapons, a non-issue. What they were worried about was eliminating population, deindustrializing. That's what their goal is in Germany. And we're seeing that collapse. The latest polls in Saxony, for example, are bad news for those who are supporters of the war. The elections are coming up in a week or so in Saxony. The minister-president of Saxony, Kretschmer, who's a member of the Christian Democrats, just endorsed the idea of moving the missiles, U.S. missiles, into Germany. And he immediately dropped in the polls. He's now behind the Alternative for Deutschland. Now, whatever you've heard about the Alternative Deutschland and whatever you may think about them, one thing that's clear, they're against the war in Ukraine and want to have relations restored with Russia. And that's one of the reasons they're under so much attack. But what we see from the allies, the NATO forces, the US, the German government, a policy that's committed to death and destruction, tax dollars going to the military, industrial, financial complex, and for what purpose? To save the collapsing unipolar order. Now, a part of this, the second point I want to make, is the pre-World War narrative control, censorship. This is typical of what governments do when they're about to go into wars, which they know will be unpopular. You had 2 days ago the arrest of the Telegram CEO, Pavel Durov. And the charges against him are lack of content moderation, which supposedly has allowed child pornography, drug trafficking, other criminal activity to be placed on the messaging app of Telegram. Now, without having seen a lot of the evidence of this, what is clear is that this is an attack on a site which is outside of the control of the establishment. And Edward Snowden pointed out that this is nothing but an attack on free expression, an attack on the right to disagree, and a shutdown of a public forum. You either accept the narrative or you'll be shut down. Now, they're also going after the Rumble platform. So this is an across-the-board attack on anyone who disagrees with the mainstream policy. Now, let me remind you, the establishment that's attacking Telegram for supposedly promoting child pornography, doesn't that establishment include a lot of people who partied with Jeffrey Epstein and protected the child serial molester Jimmy Savile? And now we have an escalation of censorship in the United Kingdom ordered by the new Prime Minister Starmer. Now, Starmer, don't forget, was the director of public prosecutions when the decision was made not to prosecute Savile. I'm not saying that he blocked it. There's some charges that he did, but I haven't seen the evidence of that yet. But what hypocrisy. You know, a culture that promotes the transgenderism and promotes drag queens at the Olympics and in your children's schools is protesting so-called pornography on the internet. Well, this is clearly an effort to silence any opposition to the mainstream policy. And in fact, now there are sentences being handed down in England, a 20-month jail term for publishing written material which is, quote, threatening, abusive, or insulting, unquote. In other words, criminalizing free speech. And you had recently the arrest of Richard Medhurst, who is a journalist who disagrees with the UK policy on supporting Netanyahu. Now, the third thing I want to point to is just a final wrap-up of the Democratic National Convention Love Fest, celebrating joy and freedom. Now, what's the joy? The joy of permanent war? Kamala Harris said that the United States must have the most lethal force in the world. She will stand by Ukraine. She will stand by Netanyahu. Where's the joy in that? Where's the joy for the children of Palestine that remained out of the picture at the Democratic National Convention? She's going to continue the Biden war policy and green policies, just as we reported, that they got rid of Biden because they didn't think Biden could beat Trump, so they tried another option. Now, Trump was thrown off by this initially, and some of his reaction was not so focused. But in the last days, he seems to have regained his footing with the endorsement he received from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is basically shutting down his independent campaign, and the endorsement yesterday from Tulsi Gabbard. Now, both Gabbard and RFK Jr. emphasized the danger of nuclear war if the Biden policy is continued. That is, if Harris is elected, we're heading down the policy drafted by the military-industrial financial complex of dismantling Russia, of taking on China, of destroying Iran, of trying to keep the world safe for the real autocracy, which is that of the military-industrial financial complex. Now, whether the Kennedy endorsement and Gabbard endorsement are big, we'll soon see, but it's potentially decisive in a race this close. And the fact that both warned of the danger of nuclear war if the policies are continued is extremely important, because that has to be discussed. You can't block it out. And finally, I think the other thing that Trump did, which is significant, is announce that he would set up a presidential commission of inquiry into assassinations, including the attempt against him, but also fully opening the books on the assassinations in the 60s, which included Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s uncle, President John F. Kennedy, and his father, RFK Sr. The possibility of opening up an investigation into the International Assassination Bureau run by the CIA, MI6, and NATO is extremely important and shows why the establishment is so committed to keeping Trump out. Not necessarily that Trump will do everything that he says, but that he's unpredictable, and that lack of predictability is what threatens them. Now, I just want to make an announcement that tomorrow Simon Miller will be back. He'll be doing the Wednesday updates in the near future, and then I'll see you again on Thursday.